Finger strength is the most important aspect of basic strength for any climber, and the fingerboard is the most important way to train your basic finger strength. I think every climber should be using one of these, and in this video I'm going to go through the fundamentals of how to use a fingerboard and how to use it safely. The first aspect of how to use the fingerboard is what exercises to do on it, and it's the question that I get almost daily. So a big controversy, I suppose, in the climbing world is should you use these boards for maximum finger strength, or should you use them for longer duration intermittent intervals? And to me, the answer to that is quite simple. This is a strength training device. If you have access to real climbing or a climbing wall, then you should use that for your longer duration endurance type exercise. Some people in the past have advocated using exercise protocols like hanging for 7 seconds on, 3 seconds off, 7 seconds on, 3 seconds off in longer intervals for a few minutes. Now, I think there is a case for using those things, for using those exercises where you don't have access to a climbing wall. If you're at home or working remotely and you're away from the wall, you're away from the rock, and you don't have any other option, that will help to maintain your endurance for the next time you go climbing. But if you have access to a range of walls and options for training, then when you come to the fingerboard, I would use this for strength training, and strength training means maximal activation of the muscle. So that brings me to the most important mistake I think that climbers make in using the fingerboard, which is not pulling hard enough. Doing well on the fingerboard is all about telling your muscle that it's got to pull harder, and it's got to pull harder now, and that it's not strong enough. And that message has to be sent by really loading it maximally. So there is a bit of a trade-off though between the amount of time the muscle is loaded and the intensity of that message. So the goal is to kind of walk this line between hanging on the fingerboard for enough time to give sufficient stimulus to the muscle, but for that activation to be close enough to your maximum to tell those large fibers in the muscle to grow. What that all boils down to is when you do hangs, I tend to favour a hang of around 7 to 10 seconds, maybe closer to the 10-second end. How to arrive at that figure? Trial and error. There's not really any scientific data to guide us here. In climbing for years and years, we've borrowed where we can from research from other sports or basic physiological research. And what the basic research in sports science tells us is that the absolute duration of any strength training protocol, like loading, whether it's 5 seconds or 5 reps or 10 seconds, 10 reps, or longer or shorter, within a certain window, it doesn't appear to matter all that much. What seems to matter more is that the muscle is pushed to the point of failure and that you really give it that maximal message. So trying really, really hard is what you're trying to cultivate, and that is a learned skill in itself. A lot of climbers that I coach, you actually find that you're coaching them to learn to try hard. And often when climbers do coaching sessions with really good expert level climbers, that's the one takeaway that they have, is they say, I see, good climbers make hard climbing look easy, but what I've realized is that those good climbers also try really, really hard. In fact, that is their skill, is they know how to try hard. So part of your strength training exercise is not just loading your muscle, it's also training your mind to know how to deliver maximum force, maximum output to the muscle. With those general principles covered, let's move on to how you actually structure a workout. So obviously the first aspect of the workout is the warm-up, and that's very important for safety and injury avoidance. So I'm using a power station setup here. with an edge fingerboard. So I can use some footholds to hang off the fingerboard very gently. But usually on the fingerboard, for me, it's fine to just go straight on the largest rung, the jug rung, and do some sets of pull-ups. And I would start with sets of 5 pull-ups and then progress to sets of 10 pull-ups. For someone who's not as strong, might have to use some footholds, or if you've got your fingerboard mounted above a door, then you can put your feet on a chair to do some supported pull-ups. And you could start with those on the biggest hold. And it's a good idea to do that just to warm up your bigger muscles and really just get your body moving and tell it that some exercise is about to happen. And then it's just a straightforward progression in difficulty over the course of 5 to 15 minutes. It really depends on your athletic level, how long your warm-up takes. For me, I can get warmed up in 5 to 10 minutes really on the fingerboard with a straightforward, a quick progression. I know how my body responds, and I'm also doing quite a lot of training. For other people it might be different, it might be a lot longer than that. So start off with some basic hangs on the biggest rungs. You can start with hanging and then progress to a few pull-ups, either feet supported or not, and then progress to a slightly smaller rung, the middle rung of the edge, and then ultimately some two-handed hangs on the small rung. Again, depending on your level, you might support your feet on the footholds or on a chair if it's mounted above a door, or just hanging on 2 hands. Really with working out how to use the fingerboard, you have to be a bit inventive to match your level in climbing and your strength level. So, find what works in terms of intensity. So, once you've completed your warm-up, then you can move on to the main hangs. And you can build up your workout by just covering all the different grip types. So there are 3 main grip types to cover. The first is 4 fingers open hand, and you can see that both my index finger and my little finger are fully open-handed, but there's a bend in the middle joint of my middle 2 fingers. So it's not a crimp, it's not fully open-handed, somewhere in between. So that's the first one. The second one is crimp, but we generally don't use a full crimp with the thumb over on the fingerboard. It just doesn't feel so comfortable when you're hanging either 2 arms or 1 arm. It feels more comfortable when your feet are supported on the rock in real climbing. So we tend to use a half crimp. A lot of people feel that it's safer to use a half crimp as well and less risk of injury. I'm not sure about that. I've not seen any actual scientific research on it, but it may be true. The third grip type, is full open hand, or 3-finger drag, as some people call it, where your little finger is dropped and the middle joints of your fingers are fully open. And when I coach climbers, the 3-finger drag is almost uniformly people's weakness in climbing. And it was for me when I was a young climber as well. I was much stronger on a crimp grip than in an open-handed grip. And often when I coach climbers and I say, hang off the fingerboard with a 3-finger drag, and they can't actually do it, and they also feel that it's it just feels strange, and I try to say to them that it's just because it's weak, and once it feels stronger, then it will feel a lot more natural. And what happened to me was I favoured crimps on almost all small holds for many years, and it's a pattern that I see all the time, until I got a string of pulley injuries in my fingers. In fact, I had pulley injuries in all my fingers over the course of about 5 years. And it wasn't until I reached the stage of exasperation about this that I started to climb open-handed, because it was the only thing I could do to climb. And then once I did that, after a few months, I started to get strong enough to for that to feel really comfortable. And now I tend to favour open-handed, over and above crimping on small holds. And in fact, now I've almost got the reverse situation where crimping has become my weakness, and I have to do more of the time on the fingerboard on crimps. So because the 3-finger drag open hand feels particularly weak for so many climbers, the fingerboard is actually a really great place to introduce yourself to it and gradually build up from that low level of strength, because it's an artificial environment. And you can start from wherever you are in terms of strength. You may not even be able to hang on the fingerboard without some support for your feet at first, but that's fine. Over the course of a few weeks, you'll gain strength rapidly, and then obviously that will level off. You can do a few sets of each grip type. I think between 3 to 5 sets is maybe a good amount to give your fingers a good workout, but not be too tiring that your strength is going downhill. What you want to avoid is trying to do a maximal strength exercise when you're no longer capable of doing it. So were you to come to the fingerboard and try and do 15 sets, after about the 5th set, your strength will start to go downhill and you'll not be able to reproduce the same level that you could do 20 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago. And when that happens, you know it's time to move on. If you can't deliver close to your maximum, then you're not really strength training and you should rest and come back for another session. So after the main maximal hangs you're doing on the smallest rung you can, you can move on to a few other additional exercises. And now that may be things like 2-finger pockets or middle 2, front 2, and even back 2, which is always my weakness. Or it may be onto some pull-ups or some front levers, or some one-arm pull-ups. So one of the most difficult aspects of fingerboarding is actually choosing the right intensity of your hang. So it's unlikely that your level of strength will just happen to coincide with the sizes of the rungs. So for instance, for me, hanging on the middle rung of the edge is a little bit, well, it's too easy. And even hanging on the bottom rung, which is a bit smaller, with 2 arms, is a bit too easy. I could probably hang on that for 20, 30 seconds. I'm not sure, but it's too easy to be maximal. However, hanging on one hand on the small rung, or even the middle rung, is a little bit too hard. So I would actually need to take some weight off if I was going to hang on one hand. And so how you find the right intensity is just a matter of being inventive. And there's a number of different ways to do it. One way is to do 2-armed hangs, but add some weight to your body, so you can wear a harness and hang some weights from your harness. That's pretty simple. Another way is to hang a weight from a power station or from underneath your fingerboard setup somehow, and to take some weight off, so you can hold on to a weight on a pulley that's maybe 5 kilos, 10 kilos, and hang on one hand and just reduce the weight as you get stronger. Another even simpler way is just to hang on 2 arms, but to take fingers off with 1 arm. So let's say on the small rungs, I was strong enough to hang on 4 fingers on one hand and 1 finger on the other. So I could do a set like that, and then switch hands and do it the other way around. And that actually feels a little bit easy for me. So the next progression would be little finger. I'm not quite strong enough to hang on one hand on this, but I can probably hang, yep, like that. And that's not far off the right difficulty actually. So again, it's just a matter of being inventive to find the right intensity level. So how long should you rest in between the sets on your fingerboard routine? And the short answer to that is as long as it takes for you to be able to reproduce the same effort. So for most people, around 45 seconds to a minute and a half, I think is sufficient. It might be slightly more, it might be slightly less. But broadly, I tend to rest about a minute in between my sets. And I feel that I can come back after a minute and reproduce another maximal effort about the same level, because the hang time is around 10 seconds. And so it doesn't take that long to recover from. So that means, let's say you're doing your 4-finger open hand hangs, you would hang for 10 seconds, rest for a minute, hang for 10 seconds, rest for a minute, and do that, and then move straight on to the next grip type. So let's say your warm-up takes around 10 minutes, and then it takes you around 20 minutes to do 5 sets of each different grip type, plus maybe a few pull-ups and things afterwards. That means in total you have a half an hour workout. And most people can do that quite a few times a week. Fortunately, there's an easy way to figure out whether you're loading your body too much and you're not able to recover, because your performance on the fingerboard will tell you. If your performance is going down and it's depressed, then it's going on a downward trajectory, that's the most important thing, then you know that maybe there's either the training is too hard or the recovery quality is insufficient, and that comes back to sleep, nutrition, all the other aspects. So if you would expect, if you're doing a hard period of training, that your performance will depress a little bit, but it should level off and stay consistent, and then maybe even start to improve during the training, and certainly once you rest a bit more, it should improve a bit more again. And what you'll find is that if you are unused to the fingerboard and you start a program of doing it a few times a week, the initial gains for the first session, the first few sessions, the first few weeks will be quite rapid, but they will level off quite rapidly as well. And then in the following months, you may feel that there's not much improvement happening, that your performance from week to week on the fingerboard doesn't seem to change that much. And my message is, stick at it. The strength gains are very slow, and often they're not really noticeable on the fingerboard itself, but down the line, after say a winter's training or a summer's training or whatever, when you go back on the rock, you will feel that you have improved. Certainly for me, it was a revelation for me when I started doing proper organised fingerboarding on a regular basis. So my level was about 8B red point in sport, or about font 70 plus, font 8A in bouldering. For several years I had plateaued, and when I started fingerboarding 6 days a week for a whole summer, that same winter I went to 8C and font 8B, and the following year I went to font 8B plus and French 9A. So it really propelled my level in climbing, and it was one of the biggest lessons that I learned in the whole world of training for climbing. The final aspect of fingerboarding is how to schedule it into your normal climbing, and that can be quite a challenging aspect. It's just hard to know what to do best. For me, I tend to like to climb outdoors a lot, and I live near lots of outdoor climbing. So when the weather's good, I want to go out climbing. I don't want to train. So I tend to have quite a flexible approach, and I just train when the weather's poor, and I go out climbing when the weather's good. And that works absolutely fine. You know, there's a lot of attention to scheduling training and making everything into blocks and periods, and that's great if it suits your schedule. But you can still get the bulk of the gains, like most of the gains that you need, from a much freer approach. The main problem for most people is not doing the training in the right order. It's doing the training at all and getting those basics right, like being able to pull really hard on the fingerboard. Your body will soon tell you if you're doing too much or too little training, if you're actually listening to it. So I like to keep it fairly simple in that respect. Now, there are a few basic rules, which is you should try to do the fingerboard workouts when you're relatively rested. If you're wasted from a big endurance session, like let's say you've come in from a day's sport climbing, if you try and go on the fingerboard and do a workout, you're just not going to be able to reproduce your maximal efforts as if you were fresh. So you shouldn't try. You should rest and come back the next day, or maybe after a full rest day. And in general, if you're in a given week, you can fit in more training if you split up the loading into different types. So one day sport climbing, the next day fingerboard, the next day bouldering, the next day fingerboard, the next day sport climbing. And if you mix it up like that, you're giving the energy systems, the muscles, a rest from one type of activity, and on the following day you do a different type of activity. But again, we come back to the point that your workouts on the fingerboard are intense, but they're also very short. So you can often fit them in with other things on the same day. So for instance, I'll often do a bouldering session and a fingerboard session and a little bit of campus boarding on the same day, but then take a full rest day afterwards, or then go out climbing out on the rock on trad or sport or winter or whatever the following day. And that feels fine for me. I have 20 years climbing experience behind me at a high level, so I've built up to that. Other people will be different for sure. But again, I found my own level by listening to my body, and that's what I would encourage you to do as well. However, some people definitely respond well to a periodized, organized training program that they follow. It helps to motivate them, it helps to focus them, it helps to make sure that the workouts get done, and it also helps to track and monitor everything so that you can identify what you've been doing more of and what's worked and what's not worked. So what about avoiding injury on the fingerboard? Well, we've talked about the warm-up process, which is critical for preparing your body for a maximal effort. But there's a few other basic aspects to avoiding injury on the fingerboard. And the first of them is form. So there's a couple of mistakes that people make with form that are really pretty simple. The first is when someone anticipates that the hang is going to be really hard, often in an effort to work against gravity, they'll actually jump off the ground and jump up into the hang. But if you're not strong enough to actually hold that hang very statically, then obviously gravity pulls you back down, and it tends to load the finger suddenly, and that's definitely a danger for injury, especially if you're doing that all the time. So to avoid that, you should set yourself underneath the fingerboard and then gradually build up tension with your fingers until you actually do a slight pull up off the ground to just pull up into the position. The other aspect to form is actually swinging around underneath the board. So you're loading your fingers at near 100% of their maximum, and if you're swinging around, then there's a chance that one of your fingers might slip slightly and load the other fingers, and that's definitely a risk for injury. So to avoid that, just find your centre of gravity underneath your fingers, so that when you pull off the ground, you don't swing. So I sort of pull a little bit off the ground, and if you're too far under the board, you can feel that you're going to swing backwards, and if you're too far in front of the board, you can feel that you're going to swing forwards. So just try and set yourself and become sensitive and aware of your positioning underneath the board so that you don't swing. Another important aspect is the temperature and humidity. So I'm in my living room in my house. It's a little bit warm. My fingers tend to sweat quite a lot, and so I have to take good care to make sure that I use plenty of chalk, and that I try to even chalk up even between my sets, just to keep my fingertips dry and chalked, so that there's less chance of slipping off the board. And it's not just necessarily slipping altogether, but just when you're loading, if one finger slips slightly, I have actually injured my pulleys in that way before. So if you can place your fingerboard in a cool place that is not too hot and not too humid, then great. And if you can't, then just make sure you use chalk and that your skin is in good shape. So which fingerboard should you choose? Well, I think the most important aspect of a fingerboard is what it's made of, and wood has definitely become more and more popular for fingerboards for a good reason. It's very kind on the skin, and it also helps to absorb the moisture that comes from your skin, so you have good friction even when you're training in a warm environment. So I'm using an edge fingerboard. I helped design this, so I really like it. There are some other good options around. Now, I like the edge because it doesn't have any plunged pockets in it. It just has a straightforward rung, so there's no opportunity to nestle your fingers against the side of the pocket to get any advantage. It's just straightforward pulling, and we also put a lot of effort into making sure that the rounding is just right, to be really comfortable, so that you can train and pull as hard as you can, but you're not going, ow, like that's sore on my skin, that's nasty to hold on to. So you just have very simple, a large rung for your bigger muscle work, pull-ups, front levers, all that kind of thing, warming up. A middle rung which will be suitable for the bulk of people for two-handed hangs, maybe with a little bit of weight added, and a small rung which will suit people that are just a bit stronger on two arms and for the very strong on one arm.